People who have been homeless, what was the first night without a home like, and how did you adapt to your new situation? I was about 9 years old, and my mom said we were going on a camping trip. I didn't really suspect anything, as it was summertime and we went camping a lot when I was younger. Although I did wonder why we were packing so much stuff. After a few weeks of camping, I started to complain. But my mom kept insisting that it was good for us to get in touch with nature, etc. Then school started, and we were still camping. And we kept camping for another 6 months. When we finally got a house, my mom cried with joy. And we don't camp anymore. I remember being really hungry and acting weird because of the low blood sugar. Almost delirious. This was when I made a futile attempt to run away from an abusive home with no money. I ended up going back because of that. I was homeless for a couple of months a year or two ago. I had a car and a low-paying job, so I lived in the woods in a tent for a bit. The first night was miserable. I ended up sleeping really uncomfortably in the passenger seat of my car, and it was a really cold night. After that I got a tent and slept on an old climbing pad I had. The first night was hell, but the next several weeks were actually not so bad. I had a spot in the woods where I was well hidden and would cook over a fire. I really didn't have it that bad, but it gave me quite a bit of sympathy for people who really do end up on the streets in a much more desperate situation. Tea is not easy. Sleeping in my car wasn't that bad. It was summer, so it was pretty warm, which was my biggest issue. Showered in the gym, and spent most of my day at the library before going to work. For the first few nights it wasn't bad. However, one night police found me sleeping in my car and escorted me to the local homeless shelter, which was one of the most terrifying nights of my life. Since I'm lying there in a top bunk, when a huge argument breaks out because one guy breaks out some meth, wouldn't share it with a second. Then a third got pissed and started screaming at them to be quiet because he needed to sleep. Edit. Since this is coming up a lot, people keep asking how it was legal that the police escorted me to the shelter. I don't know the legality of the issue. What I can say is that I was woken up by a knock on my window to see 4 cops. 2 cop cars. They were singing those super bright flashlights through my window at me. And I didn't even think of arguing with them. I was kicked out by my mother at 16 and spent 2 months homeless before the local authority placed me in foster care. I think what hit me first was how my own mother could make one of her own children homeless. I felt like the least favorite of her children. It all came out of nowhere. I racked my brain for years after, trying to think of what I might have done in particular. Also, the crippling loneliness you feel when you are trying to get hold of people to ask for a place to sleep for the night. I could not feel more alone in the world when someone would either not answer my message or tell me they were busy. I'm pretty sure I camped out in a park that night. Didn't sleep at all. Slept in my vehicle. Couch surfed with a friend. Squatted in an unused trailer. All while still working at a Walmart. Saved enough to get a crappy apartment and just kept going from there. It was terrifying and cold and hungry. I didn't sleep a wink. I adapted over time. Extremely steep learning curve to surviving homelessness. Nothing really prepares you for it. I kept waking up in the middle of the night and would start walking home. I'd get a few steps, then stop and realize I had nowhere to go and turn and walk back over and lay on the ground. The ground is very cold and I felt a lot of shame. When I was a teenager, I had lots of problems with my mom. I pretty much chose to be homeless. I slept at a Catholic church across from my high school so I could still make it to school and graduate early. I remember feeling really sad because I slept where they put people's ashes. And I remember being so sad that those people could comfort me in death more than anybody alive. I used to talk to them. If there's camera footage, I look insane. I never realized how alone I was in the world until I was homeless. And I never realized how cold concrete can be. It chills you right to your bones and is painful. I was getting high, so it really didn't truly sink in until I was broke and dope sick. Then the desperation started. Going to gas stations, jumping car to car asking for money. Stealing what I had to. It was a miserable existence. There are so many things you don't think about when you're not homeless. Taking a shower. Washing your clothes. And the boredom. Hours upon hours of nothing to do. And the constant noise. There was nowhere to go where it was truly quiet. Fortunately, I eventually got arrested for shoplifting, reached out to family who helped me get back on my feet. I didn't really realize what was going on. I was about 6-7 at the time. Dad said we were going to go for a drive and to pack my backpack with all the clothes I could fit and one toy. Mom was just crying. Me and my brother sat in the back seat. He was a little older and was holding our Sega Genesis and looking scared. We drove for a little while. It was already getting dark, and we parked in front of a Walmart and Dad said he had to rest for a while. Was the first of many nights we slept in the car. I remember one of my parents was always awake, with their hand in their coat pocket. Looking back, it was obvious they had a gun for protection. Sleeping in shifts. Edit. Jesus, this blew up and thanks for the gold. Trying to respond to all but my poor inbox. Edit 2. WTF guys, 3 gold. Thank you. My ex-wife made up a bunch of shit to get a restraining order. I got served at work while she simultaneously shut off my phone service and locked me out of our shared bank account. This was the 7th of January 2016. I had a t-shirt and slacks to wear for clothes. And nowhere to sleep. My car didn't have working heat. Thank God for my parents who got me a hotel, new phone, and some money for clothes. I ended up living in an extended stay hotel for 2 months while I looked for an apartment and got my affairs in order. The restraining order was dismissed. The divorce went to trial. And I got the house and the kids. I was homeless for a little while in the 80s. It's terrifying at first. You feel so unsafe. I was a teenager and wasn't willing to close my eyes and sleep on a park bench alone. So I went to a local shelter and lied about my age. They forced me to shower and do a pee test. Turns out the women in that shelter were scarier than the street, so the next night I didn't go back. I slept in a park but ultimately made squatter friends and stayed with them. It was very much a community and I felt safe and loved there. The biggest problem with being homeless in the city is no one wants to let you use the bathroom. Even park bathrooms are locked. Squat peeing in between cars can be done quickly and undercover. But when you get your period, it's a nightmare. These days I have stability, so I never pass a homeless person without buying them some food or giving them a little money. And if they use it for drugs or alcohol, I don't care. Living on the streets is hard. Drink if you need to, my friend. I don't recall my very first time exactly. I do remember looking for a friend that was homeless and his friends ended up watching over me. Everyone was drunk except me. I didn't sleep. More recently, less than a month ago, I lost my housing and everything I own. I'm alone this time. I sleep during the day and browse Reddit at night. I was homeless for 10 years the first time. And I am terrified now. First thing I realized at 18 when leaving home and finding myself stranded straight away is that I wasn't as unlucky as I had always thought. Female. Young and normal looking. Got support from loads of random people who deemed me very brave. It hit me really hard that if I was fat or a guy, I would have been screwed. I lived in Spain by then and a couple of nights at a park was quite exciting. Just a couple of nights is what it took to get emergency accommodation. And nobody bothered me. Then jumped from shitty job to shitty job for a few weeks. Ended up getting a year-long apprenticeship selling shoes. Second, I learned that hitchhiking is very cheap and pretty safe in Europe. Just kept clean looks. Did loads of workaway placements and slowly got on my feet. I am 28 now and settling down in Cornwall, UK. I feel like I'm too late to the party. But I was actually born homeless. My mom put newborn me into a small laundry basket filled with blankets she'd been gifted. I spent the first year of my life living out of a car with my family. My mom had my 5-year-old brother and 4-year-old sister with her. 2. All living out of a Grand Caravan in the early 90s. She'd taken us to Wyoming to hide in the Rocky Mountains. So, at least I got to sleep under the stars at night. I've been homeless most of my life. I have stories about it if anyone finds this and is interested. I was 18 and had depression. Only had to do the final exams and I would have been good to go. But I panicked and didn't attend. Which caused me to fail, of course. Me failing made my depression even worse. My parents couldn't take it anymore. Packed my clothes in a case and set me on the street. I had no idea where to go and didn't want to sleep in the city like most homeless do because I was too afraid of something happening to me or the few things I had while I sleep. So I went deep into the woods. Opened a case with my clothes and curled up in there to sleep. Needless to say, I didn't sleep much that night. I was just disappointed in myself for being such a failure and cried a lot. Thank God I wasn't homeless long before my grandparents took me in until I found a job. When I had a job, my parents took me back in and I went to therapy. I'm good now, but getting abandoned by my parents when I needed them the most still hurts to this day. I was only 13. The first night I had to just turn the fear into strength. Got easier and easier every day. I figured out how to get clean, where to sleep, where to eat. It was easier to get used to than when I got to home again and had to get used to staying in a house again. Slept in the backseat of my friend's broken down VW Beetle. Used the light from the streetlight to study and get my homework done on time. Later on, that same friend would sneak me into his dad's camper at night so I could actually lay out flat and get a good night's sleep. That worked for a while until I got caught and his dad kicked us both out. Went back to sleeping in the bug. Got by using old airline toiletries and washing up in the public restrooms by the beach and nearby Burger King. Still made the dean's list though. I think people have this idea in their head that homeless means you're out on the street under a bridge or in a tent, but there are many facets of it. We were homeless for about 10 days after my mom left my dad. I was younger and it didn't click with me until I got older. Mom called me and my sisters and told us to pack up our stuff. We then just did what we needed to got those 10 days until she could secure some housing for us. I remember eating corn and rice for a meal, but that's the only real thing that sticks out to me from that time. Honestly, it wasn't too bad for me. I got kicked out but lived in a good area. I had a car so I just parked it in parks and stuff, and it was only about 2 weeks before I found a new place to stay. It was also just me at the time, so I really didn't mind too much. Not all cases are like this though. It was temporary and I was lucky enough to have a car. A job where I could shower and spend most my days and nights at work. I worked at a kennel and theater, so I generally didn't get off until 2 and was at work by 6, so I wasn't in my car much anyways. It was also the early spring, so it wasn't too hot and wasn't too cold. I was lucky. It didn't really occur to me that I was homeless for a couple weeks. I was 16. And my mom and I were in a domestic abuse situation. She fled to a friend's house. And I fled to my friend's house. And then from there, sofa surfed for a few weeks until my boyfriend's mom caught on that something wasn't quite right. I had spent random nights at their house prior in the spare room. But during that 2 weeks I had stayed 3 times with them. And at dinner she gently put down a fork and goes, "Sarah, something is going on. Tell me about it." It wasn't a question. So I started bawling at the dinner table and realized I didn't have a home. And in the next 5 minutes, me, her, my boyfriend, and his dad all had our shoes on and in the car. On our way to the abusive house to grab my things. Then they made the spare room my real room for a year before I could go to university and get an apartment. The first time, I had to live in a motel for half a year. Each night was the same as the last. Cramped, upsetting, but dry and safe. The second time, I got lucky and was already staying at my grandparents' house the night when I became homeless again. Thankfully, they allowed me to stay until I eventually got a new home. The first night there was blissful peace and ignorance. I was 17. I hit a car with my dad's Corvette. It wasn't that big of a deal. It was just a little damage to the front. Well, the guy I hit called my dad before I got home and told him a bunch of BS. Said his bumper fell off of his car and read my dad the riot act. When I got home I walked through the front door. My dad hit me in the chest and knocked me back through the doorway. He screamed at me and told me to get out of his life. I went to the Redondo Beach Pier where I hung out and stared sleeping under the pier. The first night, and most nights after that, were a series of moments of having no idea what to do. I was lost. After 7 months I called my maternal grandparents and asked them for help. They moved me back to Arizona and got me into college. It did, man. I haven't thought of that in years. A sudden wave of emotion just washed over me. I miss my grandma and grandpa. They were so good to me. I had no clue I was homeless. I went to stay the night at a friend's house on a weekday and after not feeling hated for existing I just didn't go back. I ended up couch surfing for 2-ish years until college hit. I lived in a minivan for half a year while I worked full time at an airport. The trick was not to actually leave when the shift ended. Or if I left, I wouldn't go super far. I could afford to eat a couple times a day and I had a cheap gym membership so that I could shower. The boredom was mind-numbing, but if it got too bad I would just go back to the airport and people watch or pretend like I was about to fly somewhere. Never missed my family so much. I walked for as long as I could and passed out on a bench in front of a church. So someone woke me up and asked if I was okay in the morning and I explained the situation and then they told me to leave since it was private property and there would be people there soon and they didn't want me making the place look bad. As soon as the words left his mouth I realized that I was already viewed as less than human after one night. I ended up going to work still as I never told them I was kicked out of my home and showering at the local community college since they never checked to see if the people using the gym were students. Eventually I got back on my feet and even now that I'm not homeless I still feel that way inside often. Like I'm less than human. You're not. FCK that guy. It was quite brief. I lived with my grandmother until she died. Just after I'd turned 18. The building society, like a bank, had refused to let me have anything to do with her house and opted to evict me. So I did. The last week was madness trying to get all my stuff out. I gave loads away to different people. I had a tiny flat lined up but that was taking longer than expected and the eviction date loomed. The bailiffs wouldn't extend further. So they came. Took my keys and that was it. I was homeless. Albeit briefly. But I had a set of spare keys. So I just let myself in and slept in a sleeping bag on the floor. With our dog. Until the flat was ready. With everything I could squeeze into my car in there. The rest of my stuff was tipped. But that's life sometimes. I did go through a period of being of no fixed abode for a while a year or so later. As I screwed up on the flat and had no idea how to manage my money properly. Eventually got that sorted too. But it's a rubbish lifestyle. I was 20 at the time. And it was the dead of winter. My first night was lots of why does no one care? Where will I sleep? How will I eat? FCK it's cold. Why me? Is this the end? The first night. I walked to each one of my friends' houses and eventually found one with their car unlocked. I slept in the backseat of their Honda and made sure to set an alarm on my watch to wake up before they left for work. It was shady. But to this day I'm grateful they left their car unlocked. A week or so later, I called family to see if I could spend Christmas with them. It was a resounding no from all parties. I cried. A lot. It really broke me. That situation lasted for a little over a month. It pressured me to get clean off the drugs I was using. I was confident that I would die, or commit suicide, if I had to live that way for any longer. Been clean 7 years now. Being homeless humbled me. I'm no longer the arrogant, selfish arsehole that put himself in that situation.